Welcome to the Dr. Wyatt Show podcast, where developing a long-lasting, happy relationship is the status symbol to achieve, and following my 6 marriage steps is a path to get you there. I'm your host, Dr. Wyatt Fisher, a licensed psychologist specializing in couples counseling. If you have resentment in your heart and you're at an impasse in your relationship, I have a team of coaches trained and ready to help you. To learn more, go to my website, drwyattfisher.com, and click on coaching. Today I'm going to talk about 5 reasons the Bullseye question promotes effective communication. Some of you may know what the Bullseye question is. Some of you may have never heard of the Bullseye question. It's one of my favorite tools to teach because it's very simple, but it's very transformative. So what it is once a day you ask your partner and they ask you, what's one thing I did right today and what's one thing I could have done better? Then all you're allowed to say in response is, thank you for the feedback. Then you're going to mull over that feedback on your own time. You're going to think about it, reflect on it, chew on it, and you're trying to sift through what is the kernel of truth in this feedback? What part of this feedback do I know I'm guilty of in my heart of hearts? What's the piece that I know I need to improve in? You're in control of that process, and that happens on your own time within the next day or two after you get feedback. So that's the Bullseye question. So there's multiple benefits to practicing this on a regular basis. So the first benefit is it's going to increase communication on the positives. How often do you walk around highlighting your partner's strengths? How often do you compliment them? How often do you point out all the great stuff they did every day? Probably never. It's very rare. Most of us do the opposite. We highlight how they blew it. We highlight how they screwed up. We highlight how they didn't meet our needs. That's what we're talented at. We're talented at pointing out the flaws in our partner. We usually suck at highlighting how they're great and the good stuff about them. So the Bullseye question guarantees there's going to be more positivity in your relationship because it's the first question you ask. What's one thing I did right today? And that forces your partner to look for what you did right. That forces them to look for the good stuff. And that's helpful for them to remember the good stuff. And obviously it's helpful for you to hear the good stuff. So that's one benefit. It's going to increase positivity in your relationship. Number 2 is it's going to increase communication on the hard stuff. Often we don't want to bring up the hard stuff. Your partner does something that hurts your feelings. Your needs aren't being met. You feel disrespected. But we don't want to bring it up because we don't want to start a fight. We don't want them to get defensive. So we just stuff it down. And because we stuff it down, we either eventually blow up or we start pulling away. And neither of those are healthy. And so this allows us to have a regular time to get out that hard stuff, to get out those negative feelings. Sometimes all we need is to get it out. And then we feel better, we feel closer because we're able to say it. And so the Bullseye question promotes communication on the hard stuff because once a day you have the opportunity to share what's one thing your partner could have done better. And because of that, it avoids blindsiding your partner. No one likes to be blindsided. And we do it all the time. Our partner does something that hurts us or they do something that upsets us, and we don't wait. We let them know right away. And that's a blindside. And then we're surprised when they get defensive. Of course they're going to get defensive. You just blindsided them with a criticism. And so the Bullseye avoids that blindside because if your partner does something during the day, you can tell yourself, I don't have to say anything about that right now. I can wait because later today we're going to do the Bullseye question, and that's when I can bring up that criticism. That's when I can bring up the critique. And another thing is during the Bullseye question, you're asking for the feedback. You're not getting blindsided. You're asking for it. You're coming at it from a position of power because you're asking for that feedback. And because you're asking for the feedback, your partner is going to have much better manners telling you what you could have done better because it's going to make them feel positive toward you that you're asking for the feedback. So it creates this regular rhythm of opening up communication around the hard stuff. Number 3, the Bullseye question is going to sidestep defensiveness. A lot of times we don't want to bring up any constructive feedback because our partner gets defensive, probably because we're blindsiding them. But this approach sidesteps defensiveness because of the ground rule. The only thing you're allowed to say in response is thank you for the feedback. You can't defend yourself. You can't blame it on your partner. You can't blame it on the dog. You can't talk about how none of it was your fault. You can't do any of that, even though you're going to want to. That's your human nature. You can't do that because it violates the ground rule. All you're allowed to say is thank you for the feedback. And then, like I mentioned, you're going to mull over that feedback over the next day or two and try to sift through the kernel of truth that you feel like you need to work on. Therefore, it sidesteps defensiveness. Number 4, the bullseye question is going to increase safety. How safe do you feel giving your partner constructive feedback? Probably not very safe. And they probably don't feel very safe giving you constructive feedback. Because most of the time when we give constructive feedback, it turns into a fight. I get defensive, or my partner gets defensive, you get defensive, people get defensive. They don't like being blindsided. They don't like hearing constructive feedback. And therefore, it doesn't feel safe. Now I don't want to bring up stuff. I don't want to tell you how I'm feeling. I don't want to share how hurt I am. I don't want to share how much you offended me last night. I don't want to share it, because if I share it, you're just going to get upset and defensive, and then we're going to have a fight, and I don't want that. So I'm just going to keep it to myself. I'm going to stuff it down. And you know what? That makes you unsafe. Because if I feel like I can't share my feelings with you of how you're making me feel, that makes you feel unsafe to me. And when I feel unsafe, I'm going to withhold. I'm going to pull back emotionally and sexually. So the last thing we want in our marriage is for our partner to feel unsafe. We want to nurture them to feel safe. And the bullseye question is one of the best ways to make your partner feel safe because of the ground rule. Because you're not going to be defending yourself. You're not going to counter them. You're not going to blame them or talk about how it's not your fault. All you're going to say in response is, thank you for the feedback. Doing that over and over is going to help your partner feel safe. It's going to take time. And eventually they'll realize, I can actually share. I can actually tell them what I feel. I can actually talk about how they hurt my feelings. I can actually discuss how my needs weren't met and how that impacted me. I can actually do that now because of the bullseye question, because we're following that ground rule and they don't get defensive. And because they don't get defensive, I feel safe to bring up how I really feel. And that's what we all want. We all want to feel safe in our relationships, but it's really rare to feel safe. And when you don't feel safe, you shut down. And when you shut down, that breaks down the relationship. So that's another massive benefit to the bullseye question, is it increases feelings of safety. Now, it might take time because you may associate your partner with defensiveness. And you may think to yourself, I'm not going to share how I really feel every day. What they do that could have been better, that's scary. I don't want to start a fight. And that's normal to feel that, especially if they have a history of being defensive. However, if you and them both are committed to following the ground rule, then it will slowly start feeling safer to share how you really feel. But it's probably going to take time. And this happens with me with couples I work with in my practice, where in the beginning when I teach them this tool, they're both kind of scared to share how they really feel, because even though that ground rule is there, they're afraid their partner won't follow the ground rule, and they associate their partner with defensiveness. And so in the beginning, they just share a little bit of that constructive feedback. But what they find, as they're both following that ground rule, they feel safer to share more. And they feel safer to be more open with what they're really feeling. And that's what you want. You want to cultivate a culture in your marriage of safety. And following the bullseye question and that ground rule is going to get you there. Number 5, the 5th reason the bullseye question promotes effective communication is it increases change. When we bring up a constructive feedback comment for our partner, what we really want is for them to make some changes. But instead, we blindside them, we say it in a critical way, and they just get defensive, and the last thing they want to do is change. They feel attacked. They get defensive. They're putting up their walls. That does not motivate them to want to change. But the bullseye question changes that, because all you say is thank you for the feedback, and then you have the freedom of mulling that over and deciding what you think is legit. You get to decide what part of that you are guilty of. You get to decide what piece of that you know you should improve in. You get to decide that. And because you are in control of that process, once you decide the part you think you need to improve in, your follow-through is going to go through the roof, because you've made that decision yourself. That's coming from the inside. That's internal motivation. No one's forcing you to make that change. No one's just put you into the corner and told you what change you need to make. No one forced you into anything. You decided. You came to that conclusion. You made that summary on your own, based on your own conviction of what you think you need to improve in based on that feedback. You've come to that conclusion yourself. And because of that, your follow-through rate to change is going to skyrocket. And so that's a massive benefit as well to the bullseye question, is it promotes change because you're in control of the change process. No one is telling you what to do. No one is forcing you to make any changes. You're in control of that. And because you're in control of that, it's going to bring out the best in you, and it's going to make you follow through. So those are 5 reasons the bullseye question promotes effective communication. Number 1, it increases communication on the positives. Number 2, it increases communication on the hard stuff. Number 3, it sidesteps defensiveness. Number 4, it increases safety. And number 5, it increases change. Thank you for listening to the Dr. Wyatt Show podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, click the 5 stars and leave a review. And be sure to follow me on social. I'm on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. My handle is marriage_Dr. Wyatt. For more resources, go to my website, drwyattfisher.com. And remember, your marriage is alive. So if you care for it and nurture it, it can grow. It can come back to life. But if you deprive it and neglect it, it will wilt and die. The choice is up to you. Take care.